Hello, I'm so sorry. I truly thought it was gonna work. I had it all planned out in my head, but clearly don't do anything for the first time when you're counting on it to work. Okay. Um, well, we'll just get started from the beginning, and I'm sure Shinaza will be here in a minute if he's not tired of this yet. But um, yeah, so here's Unit 8. Here we go. So Unit 8 is not very difficult. We really had like several years where we didn't have a review like this. Um, and generally the questions are pretty self-explanatory and people do relatively well on them. But it's always good to know more so that you can lose points on other things that you don't feel as confident with. Or just, like whatever really weird FRQ questions, because there are always those. So feel free to unmute and talk to me. This is not like your face is not going to be shown on public on YouTube. Okay. Right. Okay. I wrote your names down already. So here's Unit 8. Here we go. Unit 8, ecology. So apparently throughout the review, you want to ask yourself, why do organisms do this and how does this promote survival of the population? So Unit 8 kind of ties together like everything that we've learned in previous units, but putting it in terms that are, I would say, easier to understand because you do see like documentaries of animals, like maybe even on Instagram and whatever, TikTok, you see videos of animals and pictures of animals. So those are for plants. Those feel more familiar than some of the like really detailed cellular processes, but they're all connected. Like without the really detailed cellular processes, there wouldn't be any of this anyway. But thinking in terms of survival and in terms of like the why, like how did we get here? And why are we talking about it? Why is it important? That's pretty important for all the units. So here's Unit A. Here we go. Why is this not working? Wait a minute. Okay. Okay. So here's some basics, some basics. What is ecology? Biotic versus abiotic factors, levels of ecological organization, which is what I just taught, like these three things to my freshmen yesterday. I'm sure these were on the readings that you did as well. So I'll just like go through these really fast and then we'll get to the slightly newer material in a little bit, hopefully soon. Okay, so what is ecology? It's really just the study of, I think, like a weird setting. Okay, the study of interactions that living organisms have with each other and the environment. So you want to think about maybe the same species of tigers, but if it were to be a population of tigers, they're all in the same area, they're all interacting with each other, and they're interacting with other species that are living and also the environment itself. So including like temperature and I don't know, the land that they live on and I don't know, the air that they breathe, water that they drink, all those things, living and not living within the same environment. The study of all of that is ecology. So, biotic versus abiotic factors, super straightforward. Anything living versus anything that's not living. But this is a good point to talk about a very quick review of like what do we mean by living? How do we know if something was living? Um, Something was living. They have to have cells. They need to be able to reproduce on their own. So like, well, not on their own. Parasites can also reproduce, so that counts. So they need to be able to reproduce. They use and produce energy of some sort, like use and release energy. What else? They don't have to be able to move, right? Like plants aren't moving, but they are still living. They need to be able to maintain homeostasis within like their body system, even if it was just one cell, a unicellular organism. I feel like I'm missing something, but that's kind of the basics. Biotic versus abiotic factor. But in ecology, we think about all of them, how everything interacts with each other in the environment. So then that takes us to the level of organization. So in this picture, you're able to see the different kind of levels that we can study ecology. Starting with from the bottom, it's very narrow with just thinking about one organism, then population. So population is definitely a word you need to know. It's the same species living in the same area. Move my face. Same species living in the same area. So like all the blue tang fish within one part of the ocean, they're all traveling together. They're all interacting with each other. They might be mating with each other. Well, they have to be. So that's population, one species. Then we have community, where we have multiple different species. So all the different species, all living in the same area, interacting with each other, all the biotic factors, you might say. So that's a community. An ecosystem is going up another level where you're thinking about all the biotic and abiotic factors and all the interactions that are involved. And lastly, we have biosphere, which is just the living, like parts of Earth, the Earth that has living organisms. So this should be pretty straightforward, but let me know if you have any questions anytime. Just feel free to unmute and let me know. Okay, the next one is population interactions. And we just talked about this in my freshman class today. We're not going to watch this video. I don't think this video is going to play anyway. But this is a pretty fantastic video with these very round animals. Maybe we've seen it in our class. I can't remember. Anyway, it's very interesting. What we're going to talk about, we'll talk about habitat versus niche. There are also other interactions other than the ones below, like predator and prey relationship, herbivores, and the plants, competition. Those are all fairly easy to understand. So I'm going to focus on some of the newer material or material that you learned freshman year that you probably don't remember. Habitat versus niche. Habitat is just where they live, versus niche is where they live, including that. Oh, where'd it go? I was not showing it. Right here, where they live, but also the roles that they play within the environment. So for example, with these dung beetles, they are living in like this part of the land, but they are also like interacting with the other dung beetles. Or maybe there are these microorganisms that live inside on the outside of the dung beetles. Maybe there are birds that will come in and, I don't know if birds eat dung beetles, but if there were birds that ate dung beetles or whatever other animals that ate dung beetles, that interaction between the predator and the prey, their like activity patterns, what time of the day do they sleep, when do they come out and do things, all of that. So that's niche. So niche is a lot more broad. It gives you a more holistic view of what the organisms do in the ecosystem versus just where they live. But it does also include where they live. Okay, so then here are all the interactions for all the different organisms. There's the herbivore, is missing predator prey on the top. There's competition, so that's easy. Symbiotic relationship includes parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. So parasitism is like parasites, right? So their survival and reproduction is depending on the host. So like ticks or fleas. What else are parasites? Roundworms, other parasitic worms. I can't remember. Other worms. There are these parasitic wasps that will lay eggs in caterpillars, and then the wasp larva will live inside the caterpillar. And you were not in my class freshman year, so we didn't watch this video, but we just watched this video with my freshman today, where the parasitic wasps larva were like inside the caterpillar, and then they're like living in there, they're moving around, and then they all come out of the skin. It's really gross. Okay, so two types of parasites. We have endoparasites, ectoparasites, pretty self-explanatory. Mutualism means mutual, so it's a mutual relationship. The two species are both benefiting from the relationship. So examples could be the alligator and more like the crocodiles and the birds. So there are these birds that will clean the teeth of the crocodiles. I'm sure you've seen pictures of those. And then so in that situation, the birds are getting some food, and then the alligators or the crocodiles are getting their teeth cleaned, which is fantastic. Mutualism, also flowers versus pollinators, pretty classic example. Commensalism is when one is benefiting, but the other one is not being affected at all. So it's not getting a positive effect and it's not getting a negative effect. So an example of those would be, there are a lot of vines that grow on trees. Sometimes those vines do harm the trees. Other times they're just simply going up the tree so they can get closer to the sunlight and not get blocked by other plants potentially. So in that case, the tree really is just there. Unless the vine is like covering the leaves of the trees are not being affected, but the vines are benefiting from this relationship. Um, Another example would be like the sea anemone and the clownfish. So clownfish are benefiting from the sea anemone, but the sea anemone are just there doing their things, from what I understand. Okay, aposematic coloration is just warning color. We talked about it in the freshman class. I don't almost 100% sure it's not on the course exam description, but let me double check. Nope, yep. Does it say have warning color though? I mean, warning color really is so basic that you should just know it. And of course you already know it. So let's see if mimicry worth talking about. We don't need to talk about mimicry, but mimicry, well, this exact wording you don't have to remember, but the concept of it is helpful. Let me just see. Do I have? Oh, look, we have pictures. Woo. Okay. So pictures. We got parasite. This is ectoparasite. Ectoparasite. This is an example of commensal. No, this is an example of mutualism where the algae are living on the crab, so they got a nice little space. Hi, Charles. Hi, Chanasa. Um, and then the crab is like camouflaging with the algae on it. We got warning color and then camouflage. Can you see the caterpillar there? It's pretty crazy. It's right there. You see it? Like the spine coming up right there. Isn't that wild? Here's warning color. This is the sea anemone and clownfish, which is commensalism. So parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism, all three of them are subcategories of symbiosis, which is just a close relationship between two different species. And then the mimicry really like you don't need to know. Oh, hello.
I was doing a packet. Check for drugs. Oh, that location's at Mexico or here? Yeah, huh? I don't know if you question, bro. That for Mexico?
What's
Charles, mute yourself.
What is happening? Okay.
Good job.
Sorry, I unmuted myself on accident.
It's all good. Mimicry. What was I gonna say? Yeah, you don't need to know the word mimicry, but the idea of it could definitely show up as an example. But I'm not making the AP test, so I can't tell you if it's gonna show up, but it might show up. So the idea of mimicry is increasing, like all of this is to increase survival and reproduction and like being able to come out on the other side of natural selection, right? So for mimicry, if you have organisms that look dangerous, but that they're not dangerous, that really is a fantastic scenario because you're not putting in the energy to make all the poisons or whatever. But then if the predators already learned through like also their own evolution that these are colors to avoid, then you're just benefiting from having this warning color without actually being harmful if the predator ate them. So the ones on the top are examples of just kind of like pretend warning colors. On the bottom, you can see a lot of these warning colors, kind of like similar patterns from different species. And that is also great because like if you create your own system of protection or like your own system of coloration, it's also great if the predator can learn it fast, right? But if there's it's really just a number game. Like there are a lot of different species that have the same kind of coloration and the predators, ate one honeybee, their mouths blew up and it did not feel good. And then they ate a bumblebee and then that was terrible for them. Then they really learned that very quickly. And then, that could either be a learned experience through their lifetime or it could be just through evolution they already know is a bad sign. But we kind of relate that to evolution. And the AP exam really just is it's just a connecting game of all the different units. Okay, so this one, I would say you don't need to know. You don't need to know the wording of it. Yeah, you don't need to know the wording of it, but again, the concept of it could definitely show up, and the more you know. the better it is in case it shows up. So in this case, the idea here is competition is like could have its benefits, especially for evolution, right? Like without competition, without these limited resources, predator prey, like these really scary situations, evolution wouldn't happen. But in terms of individual survival, competition is not great for anybody. If there, especially if there's limited resources, and there's always limited resources for the majority of the species. So here is an example. This was from back during, I made this example during COVID time, where when we used to eat in the Hanley Center. Did you guys ever eat at the Hanley Center? Or was that the year before?
We did.
You did? Okay, that's fantastic. Because every time this slide shows up for the freshmen, it just does not make sense. Anyway, so let's pretend that A and B are two different species, but now they're two different people. They come to the Hanley Center live, and there is only one chicken patty, and they have to eat one full chicken patty to be able to survive. So what's gonna happen? Either A outcompetes. A is fast and furious, and maybe punches B in the face, and A got his chicken patty. Or maybe B is really fast, or maybe B is really sneaky. It distracted A, and then B got the chicken patty. So if this were to be real species, the outcome will be either extinction of A, maybe not the entire species, but at least the population of that area. If there's not enough resources, it's possible that one group of species will just go extinct because they get outcompeted. Okay, so this is the first potential outcome. Here's another potential outcome. They both survive. So how is that possible? There's only one chicken patty. Well, you might say, it says the first line of the Hanley Center. Back in the days, we have two lines, and even the South Room right now, we have two lines. So maybe B or A will get their chicken patty at a different line. You don't have to go head to head at the same place always, right? That would be smart. Well, it's not really a smart decision. It's really just a result of evolution. And we're talking about species and not really like their decision. It's where they actually live. So A could live at a, maybe they are birds that go for insects on the top part of a tree versus these other birds that focus on like bushes and, maybe getting their worms from the ground. So then even if they're eating the same type of insects, they're not going head to head at the same exact place where they're sharing the same like food and resources, other resources, and also the same location, which is including in the same niche, right? Like having the same exact niche when there's not enough resources is really the problem. So that's one potential outcome. Well, maybe one of them doesn't like chicken patties anymore and it decides to eat burgers instead. That is another possibility. So that is once again not a decision. It's a decision that a person can make, but in terms of evolution and outcomes of these like ecological processes, it's really just natural selection doing its job. Because the ones that didn't kind of like evolve and get to eat these other food as their resources, they may not have made it in this situation. And like through generations, maybe B will consistently eat the worms. Maybe A will consistently eat insects instead of the worms, or maybe they're eating a different kind of worm, or maybe they both eat nuts, but they can eat nuts of different sizes. This is called character displacement. There should be, through evolution, a change in the actual physical characteristics. So maybe you can, the Galapagos finches, a lot of those finches look pretty similar, but they have different size beaks that allow them to crack nuts of different sizes. So that's really just a result of evolution, depending on where they were, like what islands, what food might have been available on that island in the first place. Or for some of the other islands, some of the birds started off eating the same kind of seeds, but that's too much competition. It's not good for survival for either species. So then, they like actually could both evolve to then avoid competition completely. Like one would eat larger seeds than they were before, and the other one will eat smaller seeds only and have smaller beaks than they were before. So that's character displacement. And then the other one I was talking about, eating food at different places, is called resource partitioning. Any questions about this? So this one's not super straightforward, but it's also not difficult. If you're not clear about what was going on, feel free to let me know. Okay, sounds like we're good. Okay, so this is just I'm just gonna click through this. This is the same thing, but not chicken patties anymore. Okay. There's this principle called competitive exclusion principle. You don't need to know the name, but the idea here is if you're sharing the exact same niche, there's not enough resources. One potential outcome is one gets outcompeted. So if you look at the picture on the left side, we have these organisms, Paramecium, when they're this species of Paramecium, when they're on their own, the population goes through kind of a logistic growth where the population starts off slow, grows really fast, and then it reaches its carrying capacity. So that's just how much the environment can sustain. This other one also goes up pretty fast. But then if they're in the same container, living together, one outcompetes the other one. So the other one goes extinct as like this little population. It doesn't have to be extinction of the entire species. So we have yeah, the ones we were talking about earlier, clicking through this. This is the example of character displacement. You can see how the one species of the finches, when they're on their own, they're good. Like this is how we call it the beak depth, like how wide the beaks are this way, which is what allows them to crack certain size nuts. But when they're on their own, on their own island, they're not with each other at all. Their beak depths are actually pretty similar. But there's another island where they're on the same island together, and they evolved to these had smaller beaks than this, like when they're on their own, and then these got bigger beaks than when they were on their own. So now they can avoid competition pretty much completely, and then they both get to thrive as different species of the finches. Crazy. Okay, here's another picture showing you kind of this number of individuals. What is this? Niche differentiation. Okay, this is just like niche in general. So this could be a result of character displacement or resource partitioning. Okay, so this is resource partitioning. You can see all these lizards at different parts of the tree. It's not just this one tree at another part of the forest. They're like, this is just how they live now. Like some of the lizards are on these bushes, or maybe they look like cacti. These other lizards are on the top of the tree. That's just how they live. Like they've evolved to be that way. The resource partitioning is a result of evolution, but due to the really, maybe severe competition of the resources. Okay. There's some birds, warbler. Okay. Okay. Oh, this is a really interesting video I was talking about with the parasitic wasp larvae coming out of the caterpillar. Really quite the scene. If you're interested in finding it, you can look for that video yourself. Okay, we're on to food chain. This one will be really fast. All of these words, let's see. Autotrophs, we know what they are. Primary producers, same thing as autotrophs. Let me see, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can fix this situation with clicking so many times and it not going to the next page. 1 second. You can take a little break from me talking. Not showing up at all. Well, guess I might just have to click 8 times. What is going on? Here, okay. Anyway, let us go back to what it was. Somebody said something in the chat. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're back onto food chain versus food web and all these other words. Let's click through it. Food chain versus food web. Food chain is just a chain, so it's one direction, starting always from the producers. You should know that the producers get their energy from the sunlight, but there's also the conservation of energy that you learned in physics, or maybe also chemistry, but now in biology, where like the energy gets converted from one form to another. It doesn't like just get lost, right? So the sunlight's energy get transformed into the energy that get used in the plants. So then when the grasshopper, maybe they're eating some of the plants, then that energy gets passed on to the grasshopper. And this arrow really shows the direction of where the energy is going. So from here to then here and so on. Something that is not shown on here that was shown on the packet that you were supposed to be reading. I would suggest you finding that picture if you don't know what I'm talking about. Where you see like the respiration rate versus the amount of energy that is transferred. So if you think about it, when the grasshoppers eat the plants, right? Like you, or let's just say you, right? Like as people, we're eating constantly, we're eating all this food. Where did the food go? Well, a lot of that just becomes energy for our own bodies. And also through respiration, we're breathing out like carbon dioxide. We're like releasing energy, we're releasing heat off of our bodies. So let's say, a really terrible example. Let's say a person got eaten by a shark, which happens sometimes, very rarely. But if that were to happen, the shark is not eating like the 10 burgers and like 3 pounds of meat that this person might have eaten this past month. It's only getting like the leftover that actually got stored away inside the body. So if you're looking at this diagram, like you're looking at what amount of energy is being passed down. But in terms of like how much grass you need to sustain how many grasshoppers to then be able to sustain how many frogs, that number really kind of varies because a lot of the energy is not like lost in the system, but it does get released or used in your own bodies. But there's a diagram in that like packet that has some numbers related to this that you're able to see. But essentially, the amount of energy that comes in and the amount of energy that get passed on and used up and released into the environment should be exactly the same because energy doesn't just go missing. So that's a food chain. A food web is more complex, but you follow the arrows just the same way, right? So you start here. Well, usually it will start here. The plants are the producers. Then we have our primary consumer, and then the secondary consumer over here. But in this situation, like this arrow shows you that the hawk is now the secondary consumer. So a food web, each organism can play multiple different roles. Maybe as a primary consumer, like when you're eating plants, now you're the primary consumer. But if you were to be eating cows, then beef, then you will be the secondary consumer because you're like the second one coming to the plants. You could also be the top consumer. It really all depends. So the food web is a little more complex, but it's a lot more complex than a food chain. But a food web is made up of the food chain, so super easy. Okay, over here we have photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, 2 types of autotrophs. Chemosynthesis are the one example that we often think about are the underwater volcano vents. There has to be a better word. Organisms, what are they called? What are the underwater volcano vents are called? Can't remember. Okay. Okay. In our ecosystem, decomposers are also really important. So it's not just about eating the food, but also how do we recycle the material? And essentially, if there's an ecological like gap that a certain species can fill, it will get filled, right? So decomposers really are like they're great. They're just taking advantage of all the animals at some point are going to die, or like the plants are going to die at some point. So they really have a good amount of resources available. Examples would be bacteria, fungi. We see this worm. There's a difference between decomposers and detritivores. Decomposers includes all these different types of organisms, whereas detritivores are more like just earthworms that they, take a little bigger chunks, but not as big of chunks compared to like scavengers. Okay. Oh my goodness. Well, this is gonna take a minute. We have all the nutrient cycles. So there is the phosphorus cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. I have to break this into 2 days. Ecology has a lot going on for it. Anyway, so let's just do, and there's also the water cycle. So the nutrient cycle, what is the point? The nutrient cycle the nutrient cycle is important because chemicals also doesn't just like go missing, like the elements, they don't just disappear, right? So in order for your bodies to obtain kind of the raw material to be able to build its own bodies, you'll have to get it from food. Unless you're plants or maybe some bacteria, then you can get your like raw material from other things. So starting with this one, we have the water cycle. You can just take a look at this. We have precipitation, runoff. You probably learned this back, maybe even in elementary school, definitely in middle school. There's the underground water, any kind of pond, ocean, evaporation, transpiration, and the water just getting absorbed into the plants. This is not like everything that could be in the water cycle. I'm sure different photos will show different things, but this is a pretty, solid representation of what the water cycle is. It like cycles around. On the side, you can also think about biological process, geological process, chemical and physical process. Let's say rocks breaking down. That's a physical process, like rocks breaking down to smaller parts, and not turning into other material. Physical process, right? Like water, getting frozen up in the clouds and come down as like ice or snow. That is a physical process. We did not change what the water is, we just changed the composition of it, like the state of matter. Obviously chemical reactions you all learn chemistry, I guess the physical process, the geological process, the rocks breaking down could also be a geological process. Biological process is anything that involves a living organism. And some of these processes can combine as well. That's a water cycle, pretty easy. The next one is a monster of a process called the nitrogen cycle. But first off, we want to think about why do we even talk about the nitrogen cycle? I know I talk pretty fast because there's a lot going on to cover, but if you need me to slow down, just let me know. Here we go. I'll talk a little slower for the nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle is important because of the chochochangchang, relating back to the first unit, where we need proteins. We need nitrogen in our proteins, and we need nitrogen to build our DNA. And every single cell has DNA and proteins. Most of the cells. Your DNA, right? Like you need to be able to build more cells, even if you were to be a unicellular organism, you still need to make proteins. So nitrogen is pretty important, crucial. If you don't have it, you don't live at all. You won't exist for a single day. So chang is the one here. Well, where can you find a lot of nitrogen? You know that there's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, but they're unusable. Not unusable by all organisms, but unusable by most organisms. As in like anything that breathes the air, we breathe it in, we breathe it right out. It's there, but we can't do anything with it. We did not evolve to be able to use that nitrogen. But what are some usable forms of nitrogens that organisms can be able to like go through chemical reactions in their bodies and then be able to incorporate that into the proteins and the nucleic acid? There's ammonia, there's nitrate, and there's nitrite. And I hope anybody who took AP chemistry, I hope the labeling is right. But essentially NO2, NO3, and NH4. Okay, so what are some ways that the unusable form of nitrogen can get turned or can react and become the more usable forms of nitrogen? One of the things that happens is lightning. So lightning has a lot of energy and all kinds of chemical reactions happen when there is lightning. And one of them is turning N2 into NO3 with all the oxygen and nitrogen in the air. Well, NO3 is fantastic. This process is called atmospheric nitrogen fixation. What do you need to know? Nitrogen cycle, maybe? Nutrient cycle? Water cycle? I don't know what exactly the course and exam description needs you to know, like the exact wording of it, but we'll double check with it. And I'll reemphasize. We definitely need to know the basics of the cycle. I just can't find where it says cycle. Oh, energy is topic 8.2, energy flow through ecosystem. Okay, so the course and exam description is more brief. It's not talking about the exact process, but you definitely need to know about it. Let's keep going. Okay, so we have you. So what that means, you don't need to know the exact wording, probably. Like you don't need to know atmospheric nitrogen fixation specifically, but you should know the general concept, and then like at least be able to describe the process without using the words. It's always important to describe the process and not just throwing out words. Okay. Anyway, so NO3 is more usable. So when it rains, it goes into the soil. Also, when volcanic eruption happens, which it has happened in the past, it happened more frequently once upon a time earlier in Earth's history. So there's already a lot of these converted versions of the nitrogen in like soil, for example. So these nitrogen fixation, all of them go into the soil. That's where you want them. There's another way of nitrogen fixation, like kind of making it from the unusable form into the usable form through bacteria. So these are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Anyway, so we have different types of plants. There are plants that are called legume plants, and those are plants that have like is it chickpeas? Peanut definitely is one of them. What is the other one? Thinking of lentils, I think are legumes. So in this case, the nitrogen fixing bacteria have a symbiotic relationship with these plants, symbiotic relationship, and they're able to send like that nutrient up to the plant. And then the plant will also send some nutrients to the bacteria. But also plants can just get those already fixed nitrogen from the soil and use it directly. Another type of bacteria is called nitrifying bacteria. They kind of turn one form of nitrogen into another form, into another form. You don't need to know the details. But then they don't have a symbiotic relationship. They're plants anyway. They need some sort of nitrogen from the soil. That's really all you need to know. But then after that, like after the producer step, the rest of us are just waiting to get fed. So we really need to be able to avoid competition and get our food. So you're just getting your nitrogen from all the things that you eat that contains nitrogen, which is a lot of things. So anything that has proteins have nitrogen in it. You're eating a strawberry, there's DNA in the strawberry, you're getting nitrogen from that. Ideally, you're not licking dirt, probably hard to digest, but there could be nitrogen in that as well. So when you're consuming things or food getting passed down by the food chain, through the food chain, there's nitrogen. Nitrogen also gets released in the urine. So then decomposers can take advantage of that, the feces. We have denitrifying bacteria that can go through a process called denitrification, which returns nitrogen back into its nitrogen gas form. And that circle is a little off. And it goes back into the atmosphere. And that completes the entire nitrogen cycle, which is a whole thing. You've got different processes. I just realized for freshman year, we have a whole unit for ecology, and it takes like at least 2 weeks. So we're talking all about all of that in one night. So quite the process. Feel free to leave anytime, or if you're like, maybe we'll break this up into 2 days, can do. Or maybe I'll just finish the recording. You can watch it later if you want. Okay. Next one, the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle, you probably didn't get like focused on it too much in middle school. Most of the phosphorus that we need for our nucleic acid, DNA, RNA, and ATP. Quick review of nucleic acid, 5-carbon sugar, phosphate group, nitrogenous base, or multiple phosphate groups, 1 nitrogenous base for the ATP or ADP. We have those phosphorus oftentimes come from the sedimentary rock, and they were already in there. And I don't know how they got there. This feels like a astrophysicist question, but they're there. So as the sedimentary rocks move around, go against each other, the phosphorus get released into the water sources. And the water sources get like into the rocks and the soil as well. Also, once upon a time, there was more like just a big soup of ocean on land and less of like the mountains and all that. Like the mountains have to rise from, below anyway. So they have like a lot of those rocks could have phosphorus in it as well. Anyway, so there's phosphorus that is dissolved in the water, which is great. But then if there are soils and rocks that has the phosphorus in them, they go through water runoff relating to the water cycle, then that makes it easier for the plants to be able to absorb that phosphorus. And then the phosphorus get passed down to the food chain whenever you're eating anything that has DNA in it. Yeah, you get your phosphorus. Or phospholipid, perhaps. You need your phosphorus. You just get it from eating food. Waste, release into the waste decomposers, break it down, release it back into water and the soil. That is the entire phosphorus cycle, which is not nearly as crazy as the nitrogen cycle. And it just appeared that our carbon cycle has disappeared. So bear with me. Let me just go back to another page where there might be some carbon cycle. Oh, carbon cycle is important because, you know, carbon dioxide and all that. Well, chang. Everything needs the carbon cycle. Okay, so there's a really tiny image of the carbon cycle on the left side corner. The main thing are you have photosynthesis, obviously, kind of consuming carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, not just photosynthesis of plants, like kelp or algae in the ocean, or maybe algae in lakes, those also consume carbon dioxide. And when we think about global warming, it's not just the releasing of carbon dioxide that's a problem. Chopping down trees and like eliminating natural environment that was once there before, that also decreases the amount of carbon that gets absorbed from the atmosphere that like used to get absorbed before. So we're releasing more carbon dioxide and we're preventing a lot of that carbon dioxide from getting kind of like recycled back to these living organisms. So it's really bad. As we all know. Some people don't think it's real, but I think we're all smarter than that. Anyway, so there's a photosynthesis, and you could also think about like plants, they don't just do photosynthesis, they also have cells that need that energy. They also go through cell respiration at all times during the day and at night, especially at night when they're not going through photosynthesis at all. They're just doing cell respiration, right? But they're also breathing out carbon dioxide at the same time, but they bring in a lot more carbon dioxide than the ones. It definitely like offsets the carbon dioxide they bring in versus going out. And then obviously you can get your carbon. Well, you get your carbon, like we don't breathe in carbon dioxide, we breathe it out, right? So carbon dioxide is not useful for us. And if we were to breathe in a little bit of carbon dioxide, we still can't use it. So we still have to get that carbon from food. And that carbon comes originally from the atmosphere, but into the plants and then getting passed down the food chain. And then obviously you can also think about fossil fuels, dead organisms getting broken down by decomposers and all that. I don't know. Give me 1 second. Let me skip ahead and see. Yeah, one of the things that's also not mentioned here, let me go to another page, but one of the things that I forgot to put in here is called algae bloom or algal bloom, which is related to these nutrient cycles as well. So that one is also in your packet, so if you want to find it. The algal bloom, is related to the water runoff of fertilizers. So in the soil, right? Like earlier, we're talking about how there are all these nutrients in the soil, and but there's only limited amount of nutrients. Like if humans weren't here, nature kind of figures out its own way of like balance, right? With all the different species. It's been doing that for all these, millions of years, and it's worked out fine. But well, people like to grow crops, and we want our crops to grow because we want to feed people or profit from it. So then we are asking too much from the land that we're using, then the land can kind of like resustain itself. So we're using up a lot more of the nutrients from the soil than like it can really replenish that nitrogen or the phosphorus. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the main elements that we kind of supplement using fertilizer. So we put the fertilizers in the soil, and obviously we overuse the fertilizers because why not, right? If you don't really know what amount to use, or if there's no regulation on what amount to use, you just use however much you want. And people are just trying to make a living, so not like blaming anyone on that, but the result of that is the fertilizer doesn't stay in the soil. There's natural groundwater that will allow the fertilizer to like seep through. When it rains, water runoff will take the fertilizer further into the groundwater or into the lakes and the rivers and the ocean. So then that not only off balance what's going on land, it also throws off the balance in the oceans and the lakes and the rivers and ponds, right? So what is going on in the rivers and the ponds and the oceans? Well, generally, if you remember from earlier, the nitrogen cycle, where like a lot of that nitrogen fixation happens, is is in the soil. The nitrogen gets stored in the soil. So the ocean has its own balance, and the ocean doesn't have a ton of like nitrogen, for example. And it's fine. That's the way it's supposed to be. And ponds and the rivers, that's how it's supposed to be. But when there is all this extra nutrient, extra nitrogen that get released into the ocean and the lakes and the rivers, a lot of like plants or other photosynthetic organisms, algae is our key thing over here, can overgrow because now it just like is on a buffet, like unlimited amount of food, let's just go. So they're reproducing a lot, and they are actually doing photosynthesis, and that is fantastic, right? Photosynthesis is good. We like photosynthesis. But then the algae blooms, but they don't live forever. They live, and if there's a lot of algae, at some point the algae is going to start dying. And the more that it is living, the more there's going to be dead algae, right? So then there's going to be an accumulation of the dead algae. The dead algae is also not a problem at first, but as soon as they die, decomposers are going to decompose and break down the dead algae. And decomposers go through cell respiration. And that is not a problem usually, but if you have a ton of dead algae, there's all these decomposers using up all the oxygen in the water, then it really becomes a problem. Also, the algae could be covering up the sunlight for whatever is living underneath. That's a problem. Algae, when it dies and the decomposer is breaking it down, releases toxins into the water. That's a problem. Oxygen getting used up in the water, obviously a problem. So now fish might be dying. And the more things that die, the more decomposers are doing their jobs of breaking down things, which they're supposed to do anyway. They're also just making a normal living. Now the decomposers are having a buffet, and now it's a bad cycle of what we call a dead zone. Could potentially happen in like smaller ponds where all these, it's just like a cycle of like nothing can live because there's not enough oxygen in the water. So being able to understand that cycle, it will not be asked, I believe, to explain that whole thing, but being able to make those connections with like cell respiration and photosynthesis and the nutrient cycle, maybe even like evolution, food chain, food web. Yeah, this is definitely a topic that could show up, and it'll be good to know. Okay, food chain we already talked about. Again, let me know if you have questions anytime. Food chain, I'm gonna skip. Food chain, phytoplankton, floating algae, photosynthesis. They're also primary producers. Zooplankton eat phytoplankton. Moving on from making a food chain. We don't need to make a food chain. Making a food chain. Autotrophs, heterotrophs. Yeah, these are all easy. Trophic levels. So trophic levels are just like first trophic level, second trophic level. First trophic level is the producers. It's a little different from like primary consumer, secondary consumer. For example, the primary consumer is really the second trophic level. And then the secondary consumer is the third trophic level. And each trophic level depend on the one below it. And there's something called the 10% rule, where like because of cell respiration and the energy that gets used in your own bodies, when energy gets passed on through each level, only really 10% of it get passed on because the rest of it all get used by itself. So like a cow has to eat like way more grass to sustain itself than there is grass to start with. Like, I don't know, it's not like one grass, one cow. You have to eat a lot of grass to be able to sustain a cow. Here's the 10% rule. The 90% goes to metabolic processes, just your cells, keeping the cell alive, all the activities that you do, the waste that you produce has energy in it, body heat for any kind of organism, even the cold-blooded animals, they also produce body heat. Yeah, so you can see like the numbers as well, but in terms of the energy right there. Trophic levels, again, same thing. Making a food chain again. These are just the freshman slides. That's why it's so silly. Silly Toby. Okay, the pyramid of energy is what we saw earlier. Pyramid of biomass, like just understand when we do when we make an ecological pyramid, it doesn't have to be just energy. You can also just count in numbers. It could be one tree sustaining however many number of flies, however many numbers of spiders and so on, whatever. Biomass is how much they weigh. Not super important. Okay. All right. So we're now on to kind of the last part. Let me check how many pages. Goodness me. We still have like half of it. I'm sure you have other homework. So if you feel like you need to leave, I will not be offended.
Miss
I
Pai,
will
why is
talk
this
through.
unit so long?
Yeah. I think you said why is it so long?
Yeah.
It's because we haven't like for other units, we've learned it in detail in class before. So now I'm talking through like the entire unit and everything since we haven't talked about it in class.
That makes sense. And do we have to
Yeah,
memorize all these terms? Because I understood them
absolutely
and
not.
mentioning them, but then I just kind of forgot them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely not all the terms. I will focus on if you look up the course and exam description, everything that is mentioned on there, you definitely need to know 100%, including the terms. But it also shows you like on the side, maybe some examples of like the bird songs and the colors of flowers and like some of the other examples. Those examples, you just know it as examples. You don't need to know the terms. So I would just go through the course and exam description and see like what it says. The main part in the middle, like that's shaded in blue, that is the part that you really need to be able to focus on. But I would say
Okay.
like, yeah, I mean, to make you feel better, like, I think, once we talk through all this, or even if let's say this weekend, you just kind of, I don't know, fold your laundry and just have it play on the side, just like have a sense of it. Or if you've done the ecology packet, like that's everything you need to know, already. So I'm just going over it for maybe people didn't read the packet or, feel more comfortable hearing about it. Yeah, if you read through the packet, you should be all set. And in previous years, I would say most of the years we didn't go through ecology in details, and plenty of people still got 4s and 5s, and ecology is not what's going to stop you from getting 4s and 5s.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So, let's get back to it. Okay. Goodness, this really is a lot more than I thought it would take. A lot longer than I thought it would take too. So this one is about a bunch of population things. Let's see. There are different ways that populations can be spread out. Not super important. Take a look at the picture. Moving on. In this one, the 3 curves look pretty similar. They're all logistic growth, but you don't need to know the details, obviously. But if you're shown a graph, make sure you look at like the actual titles. If it has a title, all the graphs that's given to you has a title. But your graph on the AP exam, you do not need to write a title. It will just be a waste of time. It will not be graded. It's good practice, but it will not be graded unless it asks you for a title, which it won't. You don't need to write a title, but you do need to write your x-axis with the unit, y-axis with the unit. And it's important if you're given a graph, look at the x-axis with the unit and the y-axis with the unit. So if you look at all 3 of these graphs, you can see how the numbers are spread out in different ways and the units are different as well. We're not saying that like the population growth of the fur seal is the same as the paramecium. It's not like that. In fact, the paramecium population grows much faster than the other 2 types of species. Yeah, 2 types of species. So why is that? We'll talk about that, but there are two types of growth that you definitely learned in other classes: exponential growth, I think, versus logistic growth. Exponential growth is just population growing really fast and is not stopping and is not going to stop, probably. So how is that possible, right? Like usually it's not possible. Usually it is short-lived, but let's say an invasive species is introduced to an area where like there hasn't been that natural balance. There hasn't been the ecosystem being able to kind of figure out like what is the right number that works for all the different species. In which case they can experience exponential growth, and it is a problem for all the native species of plants and animals. Okay, so there's that. The factors: predators, no parasites, not a lot of competition, no emigration. Everybody's staying here, everybody's living here. There's just hundreds and thousands of bunnies on an island kind of thing. Okay, moving on from here, we have logistic growth. Is more realistic, is what happens with organisms. It makes sense. So we have at the beginning, it's kind of slow because you don't have like a ton of population to start with, right? But as the population accumulates, they're also able to survive and reproduce and pass on their genes. So then the population is going to start growing faster and faster and use more of the available resources. But then resources slows down, or maybe diseases start spreading. Or maybe the predators find out that, whoa, this is a fantastic bunny island. Let me eat some bunnies. Pop them like the chicken nuggets. Sorry, Marshy. So then the population growth, or the population could still be growing, but the speed at which it's growing, the rate of population growth slows down. And then eventually it stops. I need to message Mr. Gibbons back about student government real quick. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. Anyway, yeah, hope that makes sense. The last phase where we get to the population size, where it's still fluctuating. Like population will not be 500,000, stay exactly that, right? So it still fluctuates up and down a little bit, but will stay relatively the same. So the growth rate is when you're looking at the slope of the curve, right? So like it's pretty slow, it's much faster, and then it slows down, and then the growth rate stops. So it reaches something called carrying capacity. Essentially, what is the population size that this particular environment can carry? When you think about population growth, you also want to think about birth versus death, because they don't just live and reproduce. Organisms also die, right? So if birth is higher than death, you have fast growth. Or if birth is much higher. If birth and death are relatively equal, then at that point, the population is not growing, and that is fine. It's natural. Okay, so that is your logistic growth. Carrying capacity, like we said already, so I'm going to move on. Carrying capacity can change as the environment changes, and the environment does change, but we're really kind of saying like if there's a bigger change to the environment, the capacity at which the environment can handle for a particular population, as in like one species living in the same area, that number could change as well. Okay, and exponential growth doesn't have a carrying capacity. In this picture, we see two different populations. We have bacteria, we have elephants. Bacteria, what are we looking at? Oh, we're looking at something called reproductive strategies. We'll talk about what that means, but essentially in both of these curves, they're experiencing exponential growth. But if you're looking at the actual numbers and the y-axis and the x-axis with the units that they have, the population growth is much faster for the bacteria in an ideal environment versus an elephant. So we're saying like even with unlimited resources, unlimited amount of space and mates and everything, bacteria will still grow like as a population way faster than an elephant's population. And we just know that from common sense, right? But really, why is that? I think there's another page that says it, but we'll just talk about it over here. You can think about how bacteria, they reproduce much much earlier. Like for bacteria to reach an age of reproduction is like a day. Like today, I put some bacteria on a plate for our lab tomorrow, and tomorrow there's going to be tons of them, right? So they don't like need to wait however many years that the elephant needs to wait before they can even reproduce the first time. So that matters. That's going to affect how fast the population grows. And well, sexual versus asexual reproduction, that matters. The gestation period, if I said that word right? Elephants don't just like reproduce and have the baby immediately. They take all these months for the baby to be able to get to the point where they can get birth versus bacteria just make copies of itself. It's just a different way of living. Very, very different way of living. What else? The number of offspring, if you're thinking about elephants versus like maybe jellyfish or plants, those organisms have a very different method where they release a lot more potential offsprings than elephants, where they usually just have one offspring at a time. So their population will grow much faster in an ideal environment compared to the elephants as well. So I think there's another page that will show this. But anyway, there is other things that limit a population growth called limiting factors. Some of these are density dependent, some of these are density independent. You should have read about this last week, but just quickly going over it. Density dependent is obviously related to the density of the population. So those are like competition. The more dense, you want to put it into a sentence. The more dense the population is, the more competition there is. The more dense the population is, the less food there is for everyone. Or more waste, the potentially more predators coming in, more diseases, more stress from overcrowding. So it's related to the density of the population. And these are factors that will prevent the population from experiencing exponential growth forever. Versus, we also, wait, is it just not going to show us? Oh, it is. Okay. In this picture, you're looking at a graph. Ooh, if you remember the double-sided graph, like double y-axis from, I think, our review session for evolution. This is a double y-axis, and if it shows up on the AP exam, we really scored high. So in this case, you see the wolves, right? Like the wolves, and then we see the moose, and you can see how the two population sizes kind of like fluctuates. So you can see how at one point the wolves population really went pretty high because they're hunting all these meese, and the population is really thriving. But then there was a disease outbreak that brought down the wolves population, which then allows the moose population to regain. Well, then at that point, that's a lot of food sources for the wolves, and the wolves are able to hunt the moose, the meese, and the meese population goes down again. And it kind of just like, it's a balance back and forth. And this is an example of a density dependent limiting factor. Also, I just noticed, like I always notice the wolf, but did you see the dead moose over here? This is the first, I've been using this slide, I think for like 7 or 8 years. I've never seen this actually, maybe not that many years. A lot of years. I've never seen this moose. I've never noticed it. It's so big. Actually crazy. Have you seen a moose before? I don't know if I've seen a moose in real life. I've seen elk. I think I was at a visitor center one day, and I stood next to like I think a taxidermy of a moose. It was really quite frightening. That moose could kick me and I'd be dead. Anyway, going back to density independent limiting factors, these are factors not relating to the population density. So these are like natural disaster, maybe some wildfire, maybe humans hunting, right? You're like, wait, aren't humans hunting related to the population? Well, not necessarily. Maybe people are just hunting anyway and not caring about the population size. But usually the density independent limiting factors feels more like kind of natural disaster type of deals. Well, it doesn't have to be a disaster. It could also just be like the amount of water that's available in the desert. And that is just how the desert is. And excuse me, organisms that ate too many pot stickers at dinner. Organisms that can thrive in the deserts, they do. They're meant to be there, and ones that are not there, not meant to be there, shouldn't be there in the first place. Okay. What else? Okay, we don't need to do this practice. Moving on. Ooh, I was talking about the elephant and the bacteria and the jellyfish and plants being able to grow its population much faster versus not. Here are the considerations, like how early can they reproduce? How often do they reproduce? Like, do you have to wait a bunch of years to be able to reproduce again? A bunch of years, 1 year maybe, right? Or can you just reproduce continuously like the bacteria? How many offspring are you having per reproductive event? So these are considerations that goes into how fast a population grows under ideal conditions, but also just natural for different species. And this is always, this bottom bullet point is just an explanation of it's always a trade-off. Energy is always limited. There's never enough energy. You can't survive without energy, right? So you have to go and get that energy. You spend energy to get that food source as well. So being able to use energy in a smart way for survival is really important. So it's really just a trade-off, like what works out for the organism versus what doesn't. And it oftentimes has something to do with the survival rate of the offspring. Like why will fish have like so many fish eggs? That takes a lot of effort. What is the point? Well, because most of them are not going to make it. So to make sure that the fish species actually makes it to the next generation, well, to make sure is a strong word. It's not a decision. It's just evolution. Anyway, yeah, through evolution, the ones that didn't make it, right? So the ones that were able to produce all those fish eggs, that's what worked through natural selection. So that's what happens. Versus if the environment is relatively stable, you can afford just putting all your reproductive energy into one offspring for like humans, horses, goats. Well, goats might have a few babies, but like very different from fish babies, right? Like elephants. You have a few babies or like one baby at a time. And the babies are also like the offspring are also more developed before they're born. That's just a very different story, and they're able to do that, and that works for them because the like elephant doesn't get killed immediately by another fish if it were to be a fish with the fish egg. What else? You also parental care is also related to this. The amount of energy spent on parental care or the lack of is depending on like what's going on in the environment as well. Like, can you afford to have that, to give that parental care to the offspring? And like, does it have this kind of structure that allows parental care, right? Like it's hard for fish to take care of its eggs. Plus most of them are gonna die anyway. That's just how it is, and it's fine. How it is. They're not thinking much about it. R strategies versus K strategies. I believe this is not on the AP exam. So I would say don't memorize it, but I'll talk about it. It's related to the previous concept of like, do you produce many cheap offspring or do you produce few expensive offspring? And expensive and cheap means energy invested in one offspring. So like an elephant baby is like the extreme end of a K strategy where there's a lot of energy put into one offspring versus like plants with this pollen, for example, is a lot of very cheap offspring, relatively unstable environment. Okay, so you can see how this is a scale. Moving on from here, age structure. It's essentially, well, the distribution of the different, like distribution of number of that species of a particular age. There's a weird insect on my window. The number of males and females of each age in the population. And why is this different from different populations? Most plants and animals cannot reproduce until they reach a certain age. And then also only females can reproduce for, most animals at least. So you could see a diagram like this, but essentially just the distribution of like age groups, plants, there's a lot more really young plants versus like much older plants. Or like for people, it's kind of more of like an even distribution, but it's different depending on the countries and all that. Let's see. Is it gonna show us the plants? It's not gonna show us the plants, but you can think about like maybe fish even. There's a lot more like really young fish versus fish that make it to like the older age, just based on how they survive as well. Ecological succession. Goodness. Truly thought unit 8 come into this. I was like, this is gonna barely take an hour. Here we are. Ecological succession is when an ecological system rebuilds itself. So pretty cool. During spring break, I went to a volcanic park right outside of, I think, Phoenix, Arizona. It's not Phoenix, Arizona. It's Flagstaff, Arizona, which is kind of near the Grand Canyon. There are other volcanic parks that I've been to, but you can kind of, they can really see how like the lava covers all these ground and how some plants are able to grow on it, or like these mosses that are growing on the lava. So that actually happens. And it, you know, that's how the ecosystem and organisms will find a way unless we ruin it all for everybody. But ecological succession is just a rebuilding of an ecosystem, either following a destruction or just like new land in the first place, like maybe a new mountain. And now all these, you know, new opportunities arise. And during the course of the succession, like this kind of evolution of the ecosystem itself, the different species the number of the different species, the diversity of the species increases. Okay, so there are two types of succession. One is called primary succession, which is one where it starts off with nothing. So it's bare rocks or bare like volcano ash or like solid lava. Or maybe it's like sea ice, retreating sea ice and exposing these bare rocks. But essentially there's no organisms to start with. So that's going to take much longer than like after a forest fire, there's still a little bit of a starting point to rebuild on. Okay, so with these bare rocks, lichens and mosses can start growing on it. Those are called pioneer species because they're generally the first kind of like stable species that will occupy that environment. Animals, can they run through? Yes. Can a bird land on a rock? Yes. They're not staying there for long term and like are really participating in the rebuilding process yet. But the lichens and the mosses are able to grow on the bare rocks pretty like much more easily because they're not depending on having the roots going into the soil. They're just like attached, right? They're absorbing the moisture. But the lichens and the mosses, as they are growing, they also like die and break down, and with the wind and the water and all these organisms interacting with the rocks, it helps the rocks break down. So then now you got yourself a little bit of soil, and soil is fantastic because birds fly and wind blows, so the seeds will land and we grow new plants. Once we have the little plants, animals, insects, bacteria, they'll all start like visiting the area, introduced to the area. They're there now. So then the ecosystem is able to really kind of flourish from there, starting with the smaller plants, slightly bigger plants, and then eventually, given enough time and given a good enough environmental condition, will grow into potentially a forest if it was in a forest system, but really just an ecosystem that is stable and is like those the diversity of the ecosystem is really high. The richness of the ecosystem is really high. We call that a climate community. So when I visited the volcanic eruption places, there hasn't been enough time. There are plants grown on there. I saw pine trees. I saw the lichen and the mosses, but it's not like flourishing yet. There hasn't been enough time. Secondary succession is more about like maybe forest fire or maybe like people clearing land. There's still roots in the soil. There might still be seeds in the soil. And in fact, a lot of plants are, and maybe even some like, I can't say if it's like fungi necessarily. There might be things that are also not plants, but I usually think about plants that are actually dependent on forest fire to then be able to flourish because without a forest fire, there's a lot of competition for plants, right? Because plants do plant things. There are a lot of them. So then the living opportunity might not be as ideal for some of the species of the plants. So there are certain species of plants that like their trigger of releasing the seeds or like the seeds sprouting is after a fire. And they've evolved to do that because fire is a naturally occurring thing that have occurred all throughout history and will continue to occur in the future of Earth. One of the reasons why, well, I mean, climate change brings more like unusual fires nowadays, but also some of the big fires that we see nowadays happens because we prevented fires for too long in a way. Like fires naturally occur, like it clears, it doesn't build up too much plants to then get burned. Like if fire hasn't happened for much longer than its natural fire cycle, then it becomes a bigger problem because now there's more like kind of timber to burn through. Yeah, anyway, we mess with the environment will do its thing anyway. But this is also why like you might see news about like controlled fires, where maybe you go to a national park and there like might be signs about certain areas doing like controlled fire, is to help clearing some of that land and restoring the natural processes that the environment needs to go through. Like it feels terrible to throw a fire into the woods, but it's what the environment needs oftentimes. It just, people might not have known this from 100 years ago, but now there's scientists who studies fire, and that's pretty cool. Anyway, in this case, we also still go through pioneer species, but these species might be a little bit bigger. Like there might be the seeds that were already in the soil, so you can have slightly bigger plants to start with, but maybe not giant trees yet, maybe more like little bushes. And then eventually you also reach the get to the climax community where it's a thriving environment again until the next fire. So that is succession. These are just a bunch of words. These are a bunch of words. You can take a look at this. The main thing is no soil versus already having soil, taking much longer, not as like thriving compared to this within a certain amount of time. But these are examples, and you can, I mean, the slides are posted. You can look at them more in detail if you need to. Keystone species. We all know about keystone species. Don't need to say much. They're important. They're related to all the other species. Eliminating keystone species, messing with the numbers of the keystone species will really off balance the entire ecosystem. Not every species is a keystone species, but it's really like an example could be like beavers building beaver dams, because the beaver dams are so important for the entire like ecosystem of the lakes and everything else that's depending on that ecosystem. But here's an example of a sea star. You can find these sea stars in California. Yeah. So the important thing is to know they're important. They will really mess up the species diversity and species population size if the keystone species are disturbed. So, other keystone species, we got some elephants, are keystone species in the savannah. You don't need to know these specific examples, it's more about the concepts. Demography. Let's see, what is this? We are seeing some different types of population survival rates depending on its life expectancy and what happens during the course of its life. So comparing the 3 different types, you do not need to know type 1, type 2, type 3. This is just an example. If it shows up, it'll be good to know. For humans, for example, a lot of living through the earlier parts, population size drops, percent of living drops when we get older, obviously. That makes sense. We know how humans work. But for birds, unless you're the top predator of the birds, so then their population size is just like, it's not saying that it's like reducing the entire time, but the survival rate is like, it's constantly in the decline. So then by the time you're not going to see like birds that reach the older age nearly as often as birds of the younger age because they get preyed on. For the trees, it's even more severe because most of the tree pollens don't make it, most of the seeds don't make it, but the ones that do make it for a long time. So the curve you can see is very different. So these are just examples. And if it shows up, it'll make sense. And probably won't show up because there are only so many questions. Thermal regulation, you definitely should know about endotherms versus ectotherms. These are words that you should know. Endotherms means internal regulation, right? Like endo, inside, therm, temperature. You're regulating your own body temperature through like the metabolic processes in your body, through panting, sweating, shivering, burrowing, sunning, all of those help you. Wait, no, wait a minute. Panting, sweating, shivering. Those are more for like more what I'm thinking about for endotherms. But animals can also burrow, or like warm-blooded animals can also burrow or stand in the sun. That all helps, but your body is able to produce a good amount of body temperature, but that doesn't mean you can go to like super cold temperature and be able to survive. There's a balance, right? Versus the exotherms are, it's not like they don't produce any metabolic heat. They still do, but they just don't produce a lot of it. And they're a lot more dependent on the environmental temperature. And that's just more worked out for them evolutionarily. So those are your like lizard and fish. Some examples from this page, we can see these pictures. We see a lizard, we see an elephant, exotherms versus endotherms. We see this big whale. Some pretty interesting notes on here. Ooh, you can even relate this to surface area and volume ratio, which is from unit 2, which is important to know, right? The bigger the body, the smaller surface area to volume ratio. And that is great in this case because bigger body, smaller surface area to volume ratio means also smaller amount of surface to allow the body heat to be lost. So large body size for these whales is nice. But the opposite of that, where like some of the fins might be a little smaller because fins, like your hands, have a lot of surface to start with. So if you have a really big fin, then that's a lot more surface to lose the temperature, lose the body heat. But if you were to have a much smaller fin, that could be nice in terms of not losing the body heat. So that's the one on the bottom where it says smaller flippers to preserve heat. No dorsal fin at all, so no heat loss over there at all. Something called counter current heat exchange. Essentially, your blood flows through some like the end parts of your limb. How the system works is like it goes this way and it comes back kind of right next to, like that's how the blood flows. So then the warm blood goes this way and cold blood going this way, but then as the cold blood is going back this way, it's also heated up by the warm blood going this way. So this is something that you might learn in college. You don't need to know the exact wording of this. Just another example of endotherms being able to kind of preserve its energy. We also got blubber, obviously, for the whales. On the right side, we have an example of a negative feedback loop, which we very much like. And then this negative feedback loop is talking about the temperature regulation too high of a temperature, allowing your brain to release hormones that allow your skin to get dilated, right? Like if you're really hot or you're feeling really stressed or if you need to run away from a tiger, maybe you're playing sports, your face might look red, your body might turn red. And that is because your blood vessels are actually dilating, getting thicker, expanding to allow more blood to flow through and allow that heat to dissipate. So you look like you're really hot, and you are, but you're also allowing more heat to leave your body and be able to like cool yourself down. This is also when you sweat as humans. So then so that's a stimulus, body temperature too high. The response of it is bringing the body temperature down, negative feedback loop. The other negative feedback loop, the other side of it, your body temperature is too low. It doesn't even have to be too low, like lower than what the homeostasis is supposed to allow it. So then your brain, interact with all the rest of your body, your blood vessel constricts. So if you see like, in really cold temperature, you might look a little pale. So your blood vessel is actually thinner to prevent the heat from getting lost. compared to normal conditions, you are also shivering. So in that case, we are doing very inefficient kind of cell respiration processes in our muscles. Our muscles are contracting even though you're not moving necessarily. So then the muscle contraction, allowing all the cells to be doing all that work, will generate extra heat for your body. So you're shivering, you feel like you're cold, but it's really your body trying to warm itself up, which you probably already know about. Okay, so that's thermal regulation. Animal behavior. This is related to the animal behavior lab that we haven't done yet. We'll do next week. These are mostly examples. It looks like the taxes and kinesis is just an example. You don't need to know the wording. Let me double check on the innate behavior. And let's see, behavior. Let's see what it says. I mean, do you need to know about behavior? Temperature regulation of the behavior. Oh, I forgot to say, like being able to stand in the sun and in the shade for all animals, warm and cold-blooded animals, endotherm and ectotherms. Those you need to know. And while emphasizing again, endotherm and ectotherms, those are words from the course and exam description. You actually do need to know the words. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like these animal behavior material from this page are just examples. I'll quickly talk through it. You don't need to memorize it. You have behaviors that you already know, right? Like knowing to look for food, babies crying so that they get taken care of. Those are innate behaviors. Learned behaviors, obviously, you learn to, I don't know, raise your hand and speak during class, or like learn to forage certain food, or like learn to catch the prey in a certain way for a tiger. Those are learned behavior. Fixed action pattern is a type of innate behavior, but the example of this is actually really interesting. So we'll see that in one of the other slides. These two are just movement in a particular direction versus kind of a random movement to get to a certain goal. Circadian rhythm is your sleep versus wake pattern. It is natural. It will stay that way, even if if you learn biology or psychology in college, you will learn more about circadian rhythm, which is actually very interesting. Signals, there are signals in the sense of chemicals, visual signals, sound signals, all that. So those are all related to animal behavior. Okay. I really, you should read into circadian rhythm. I even wrote a comic book for one of my college education projects. I can't find it. I see it once in a while, and it really is I like wrote a whole storybook about a biology paper about circadian rhythm. I was really proud of it. I think I got 100 on it. Anyway, innate behavior. Oh, the fixed action pattern. Just want to show you an example real quick. It really is pretty interesting. Thank you, Nick. Is for the stickleback again. Stickleback, I don't know, something about these fish. The scientists keep studying them. Scientists are obsessed with the stickleback. And as a not stickleback scientist, I don't understand how they got there, but it's cool that they did. In this case, they had the male versus female stickleback fish, and during their particular mating season, the males are drawn to the red. Like it's like the, I don't know, the bulls with red flags with the bullfight. I suppose it's kind of the same thing. So for males, naturally, right, in natural environments, they see the red, they see, oh, that's another male stickleback fish ready to mate with my females and, like fertilize the eggs that the females in my territory has laid. So to prevent that from happening, through evolution, once again, males will just naturally attack anything that is red. So scientists did the experiment where they like kind of painted a little, I don't know, a stick, a rock, put it in the water, and the fish started going at it. And this is something where like a fixed action pattern is, even if the actual stimulus is removed, they're still like, they're in that mood. They're going to attack even though it's not the actual fish and it's not actually harmful. Versus they see the not real, they see a swollen belly of the rock and they start trying to like, get a little attracted to the female stickleback, which is really interesting. Another example that I just read about today, because I was Googling fixed action pattern, was like for some birds that lay eggs up on a cliff, if the eggs start rolling, they'll start chasing it, obviously. But even if the egg like is no longer rolling, they're kind of like they're kind of in that zone to chase the egg. I don't know. This one doesn't feel as obvious as like aggression towards another potential mate, or just not a mate, just a rock. Choice chambers, you should know what a choice chamber is. We talked about it before when we were talking about the lab. You make a choice, you set it up. You want to make sure that there's only one variable. And there should be a ton of like different constants or like control factors. But I think they usually call it constants. So those are the things that you hold constant. You only want to make one independent variable at a time, so you can really measure that the outcome, your dependent variables, the results are actually a result of manipulating the one independent variable and not all the other potential factors. Okay. That feels like a 40% test, free test grid kind of thing. This is so long. I thought last night's was long. Dang. Okay. King selection and altruism. We'll give Charles a 20%. Charles was here for half of it. King selection and altruism. Altruism, sacrificing yourself for the other ones is not great for your own survival and reproduction, but within a population, your genes, like, you know, people, let's say even people, right? Like people share a similar gene in the same population. So then it's like, even if your gene doesn't get passed on, maybe your cousin's gene get to pass on to the next generation. So like, so you're getting like that secondary benefit of the overall goal of the entire population or the entire species being able to survive. This is usually like altruism or king selection usually is more about genetic relatedness, but a lot of the times it's also like if they have maybe another tiger that joined the population, they were not directly related, but like somehow they got involved, and tiger is a bad example. Maybe something less territorial. Let's just say people, right? Like even if I'm here teaching you guys, you know, like this, I'm not related to any of you. Like as closely related than I would have been back home, but like this is like this built-in kind of like altruistic that we want to help each other, whether we're related or not. This is, you know, we all kind of share the same kind of genes, and your survival is good for my survival is good for your survival. Back in the days during the evolution of humans, or like any organisms that have that kind of like live as a population and not just a small like one organism or like a few organisms. They're bigger populations. They might sacrifice themselves for the other ones. Even if like most of the time it's genetic relatedness, but even if it's not like a direct relationship, if someone gets brought in, like get adopted into the population, that still counts. But the genetics always overcomes the other ones, usually in nature. For these meerkats, for example. Okay, what else? It never ends. Okay. Biomes. Is biomes on the test? It doesn't show up at all. Does not show up, don't care. Look at the example, read the question, answer the question, it'll be good. It's really just different types of conditions in nature, moisture, light, soil, and all that impacting the ecosystem. Type of plants and animals it might have. Ooh, I know this is the last one because I read these slides last. Whew, we're gonna make it. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the equations real quick. You can look at the examples more in detail, but I'll go through this really fast. The equations are given to you on the right side. This is a screenshot from the equation sheet. As a reminder, the equation will be online when you're taking the test this year. You can pull it up. So at some point, if we don't get a chance to do this in class over the weekend, take a look at Blue Book. They have some like practice problems on there. You know, practice problems are always good to do anyway, but at least like try it out and test the real system out. So you know exactly what it looks like and it feels fresh when you take the test on Monday, since our test is the Thursday. Okay, so over here we have the calculation for exponential growth versus logistic growth. On the left side, it really is just the rate of the population growth, like the dn divided by dt or dy dt is just change over time, like the rate of something. So in this case, once again, rate of population growth. For exponential growth, you would use R max, which is the fastest population growth rate, which could be given to you in a question. Or maybe you calculate it from the graph by doing kind of like rise over run kind of calculation to get that R max to find the steepest slope and then calculate it from there. But ideally, they'll just give you the number and you'll use it. Population size. So you'll be able to tell that from the question as well. The other equation that you could use is for logistic growth. It has a different equation. We use R max, the maximum population growth rate. So somewhere over here, which is kind of like the exponential growth phase of the logistic growth curve. And then we have K for carrying capacity, which is this number from the graph, or maybe it'll be given to you in the question itself, minus population size divided by the carrying capacity, and then times the population size again. So you just plug it in. It even tells you what each one of them is. You just need to know what they are, you know, the rise over run kind of thing, that you should already know, I would imagine, from math. Population growth rate is just birth minus death divided by the whole population, which kind of makes sense, but it doesn't show you directly here. So maybe do think about it, but you know, I will say, if this is hard for you to understand, this is one point you don't have to get the other points that you feel more solid on. Here's a graph showing you a comparison between the two. It tells you, in this case, the R max is 1. So you can see the exponential growth rate is 1. Logistic growth, not exponential growth rate, the maximum growth rate, population growth rate, R max is 1. The population size, they didn't tell you in this case. Carrying capacity is 1,500 from this graph. Logistic growth, there are these numbers that we can plug in. But essentially, it relates to these practice problems, which has these answers right behind it. And it shows you exactly how to do these questions. So I would say it will make more sense for you to look at these questions at some point and just giving it a try. And then look at the answer key versus me talking through it. But pretty much for all of these, it gives you the numbers, you plug it in and you calculate. That is all. That's all it is. The only thing that will need a little more thinking is the birth minus death divided by population rate, and knowing seeing how the population growth flows here. Give me 1 second. There's one thing that I forgot. And then we're done. Let's see. Like, I might not be able. I found it. Okay, I just want to show you one last page real quick to look at this graph. Can you still see it? You can still see this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so for the endotherm and ectotherm, I think it skipped through this page somehow. How did this happen? Oh, yeah, okay. We skipped too many pages. This is the page I want to show you. You can see how for the endotherms, the temperature versus the ambient temperature versus like the environmental temperature is stable overall, despite the temperature changing in the environment. Obviously, if it goes way too high, animal will not be able to make it, probably. Or if it goes way too low, animal usually doesn't make it, or it has other methods to make it, you know, so that they don't die. Versus the ectotherm, as the environment temperature changes, their body changes a lot more drastically. So you can see like kind of that difference between the two. All these different species, same thing. On the right side, this is kind of important. So if you can't handle it, you don't understand what I'm talking about, maybe come back and watch this part, or ask me again tomorrow. This is one last thing and then we're done. We're looking at the metabolic rate, which is pretty important from previous units. Like metabolic rate is like how fast is your body working? How much are you putting out? And how are you able to measure that? You can measure the amount of carbon dioxide breathed out, or you can measure the amount of oxygen breathed in for most of these animals, right? Or you can you can measure the heart rate as well for anything that has hearts. So that tells you like how fast is the body working, how much work is the body working, how many chemical reactions are going on versus the other time. So it's pretty interesting. Looking at the ectotherm, the lizards, as the environmental temperature increases, the metabolic rate in this, right? Like the warmer it is, the more active the lizards are able to be. This is the resting metabolic rate. This is kind of like a normal point, but the higher it is, the harder the body is going to work and be able to do more activities. Versus for an endotherm, you can see how this curve is very different. At much lower temperature, your body actually has to work much harder to be able to keep up with the temperature demand. So your body has to do a lot of work to then be able to produce the the temperature, the warmth that your body needs to sustain the cells. And this relates to like enzyme activities, right? Like enzyme depend on a certain temperature to be able to work at its like, what do you even call that? Blanking on this. The fastest enzyme activity. Oh, this really is important. Anyway, the highest enzyme activity. Oh, what is it called? Wait. Optimal temperature, optimal pH, right? So enzymes have its optimal temperature at which the enzyme activity is at its highest. It's allowing the chemical reaction to take place much like at its fastest rate. So when the body temperature is really low, that is a problem because your enzymes are not working. So your body has to like maintain that homeostasis for yourself as an endotherm. So then your body's working much harder, a lot more oxygen consumption, a lot more like your heart rate might even be faster. Depends, but this is a mouse. And then as the temperature increases, then you're no longer dependent on your internal like generation of the temperature as much. So you can just kind of chill. So this is your like kind of resting temperature, or like the basal normal body temperature, body metabolic rate. But then obviously if the temperature is too high, now your body has to compensate for that as well, being able to sweat and do all that and sustain yourself. So do think about how temperature is related to enzyme activities, but we'll talk about more about the enzyme activities once we get to our enzymes unit 2. Those will not take 2 hours. Appreciate your patience for being here. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Miss Bai.
40%.
Thank you, Miss
Yeah,
Bai.
thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you, Nick.
Have a good
Bye.
night. Bye bye.
You too. Have a good night.